The designer heel came down on the freshly folded towels like it was intentional. Because it was. Oops! Vanessa Price smiled the way people smile when they want you to know they meant every second of it. Looks like someone has more work to do. Laughter. 3 women. Designer bags. The kind of cruelty that wears lipstick and calls itself humor. Nadine Brooks was on her knees before she even made a conscious decision to move, because that's what you do when you've been trained your whole life to clean up other people's messes without making a sound. But across the marble lobby of the Crown Meridian Hotel, a man in a charcoal suit had stopped breathing, not from shock, from something far more dangerous than shock. He had been waiting for a reason, and these women had just handed him one. If this is your first time here, welcome. If you've been with us before, you already know, we don't do halfway on this channel. Every story we tell is about the moment that changes everything. Subscribe right now and hit that bell so you never miss what's coming next. Drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels, and if this one moves you, hit like. It costs nothing and means everything. Now let's get into part 1. Nadine Brooks was 32 years old, and she had learned something about invisibility that most people never figure out. It wasn't something that happened to you. It was something people decided to do to you. And they did it casually, the way you'd look through a window without ever seeing the glass. She had worked the afternoon shift at the Crown Meridian Hotel for 6 years. 6 years of polishing marble that never stayed polished. 6 years of replacing towels that were used once and discarded like they were nothing by people who had probably never washed their own dishes in their lives. 6 years of excuse me that meant get out of my way and thank you that meant absolutely nothing. And she was fine with that. Or at least, she had gotten good enough at telling herself she was fine with it. That most mornings the difference didn't matter. She needed the job. The job paid the rent on her apartment in Glendale, covered her mother's medication refills, and gave her something she couldn't have explained to anyone if they'd asked. A reason to get up that was about something other than herself. She liked the work. Not the way people in motivational videos like their work, with fist pumps and personal brand statements. She liked it the quiet way. The way you like something that gives you structure when everything else in your life has felt like it was falling apart at the edges. It had been a harder year than she let on. Her sister had moved to Atlanta. Her last relationship had ended with a box of her things left on a porch and a text message that didn't even have the decency to be cruel, just absent, like he'd already decided she wasn't worth the emotional energy of a real explanation. She'd spent the first 2 weeks after that sleeping 4 hours a night and eating cereal over the sink and telling her coworker Marcus that she was fine, absolutely fine, just tired. Marcus never believed her, but he'd brought her coffee anyway, black with 2 sugars, every shift for 3 weeks without being asked. That was the thing about people who actually worked for a living. They knew how to be kind without making it a whole announcement. The Crown Meridian was not that kind of place. The Crown Meridian was marble lobbies and gilt-edged elevator doors, and a concierge who wore the same expression of polite contempt regardless of what he actually felt. It was the kind of hotel where a single night cost more than Nadine made in a week, and everybody on both sides of that equation knew it, and nobody said anything about it directly, because saying things directly was for people who didn't have image to protect. Nadine had learned to move through the space like water, present, useful, and easily overlooked. That Tuesday afternoon in October, she was restocking the linen cart near the east entrance of the main lobby when she heard the doors open and felt, before she saw, a particular kind of energy enter the room. The kind of energy that took up more space than the people carrying it. The kind that expected the room to rearrange itself. She looked up. 3 women. She recognized all 3 of them in less than a second, and the recognition hit her somewhere between the sternum and the stomach. Not quite pain, not quite nausea, but something with teeth. Vanessa Price, Dominique Hall, Camille Okafor. Once upon a time, those 3 names had meant something very different to Nadine. They'd grown up on the same street in East Baltimore, attended the same high school, done each other's homework, covered each other's lies to parents, shared clothes and secrets and the particular kind of friendship that forms when you're young enough to believe that people are permanent. That was 15 years ago. A lot can change in 15 years. Vanessa had married well and quickly, which was apparently its own kind of career. Dominique had clawed her way into luxury PR with a combination of genuine talent and the willingness to step on anyone slower than her. Camille had taken a different route, modeling, brand partnerships, The careful construction of a persona that photographed well and didn't require too much actual personality. They had all, in their own ways, climbed, and Nadine, in their eyes, had not moved at all. She told herself to keep her head down. She had gotten good at that particular move. She turned back to the cart, adjusted the towel stack with both hands, and was about to push toward the service corridor when Dominique's voice cut through the lobby ambient noise like a letter opener through silk. "Oh my God! Nadine?" Nadine stopped. She turned around slowly because turning around fast would have looked like she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't. She hadn't. She was at work. She was doing her job. There was nothing to be caught at, but shame is funny that way. It doesn't need a reason. It just needs an audience. "Hey," Nadine said. Her voice came out even. She was proud of that. Vanessa's eyes had already done the full inventory. Uniform, cart, the name tag that said Nadine in block letters above the hotel logo. The assessment took approximately 2 seconds and communicated a verdict that would have taken much longer to say out loud. "You work here," Vanessa said. It wasn't a question. "I do." Camille tilted her head the way people do when they're preparing to say something sympathetic that isn't sympathetic at all. "Like, cleaning? You clean here?" "Housekeeping and facilities support." Nadine had no idea why she said it that way. The official title. As if dressing it up in HR language would do anything at all. It didn't. Dominique laughed. Not loudly. She was too smooth for that. Just a short, precise exhale through the nose that said everything. "Girl, what happened to you?" And that was the first hit. Not the last, but the first. The one that told Nadine exactly how this was going to go, and that the best thing she could do was find a reason to leave right now. She started to reach for the cart handle. "We thought you were going to be a nurse," Camille said to no one in particular, the way people recite someone else's failure as if they're reading a headline. "Didn't she say she was going to be a nurse?" "She said a lot of things." Vanessa was smiling now. The specific smile of someone who has been waiting years for a moment like this and is choosing to enjoy it slowly. Nadine's jaw tightened. She said nothing. "I'm not trying to be mean," Dominique said, in the voice of someone who was absolutely trying to be mean. "It's just, this is a lot. You remember how you used to talk? All those plans?" Nadine remembered. She also remembered that those plans had collapsed the year her father died and left her family with nothing but debt and grief, and a mother who needed someone to hold everything together. She remembered taking the first job she could get that paid enough to cover rent and prescriptions. She remembered making a choice that wasn't really a choice, that was just survival wearing the costume of a decision. She did not explain any of this, because some things you don't explain to people who've already made up their minds, because dignity sometimes looks like silence. "It was nice seeing you all," she said, and pushed the cart toward the corridor. She almost made it. The stack of towels was approximately 3 feet from the service hallway entrance when Vanessa's Louboutin caught the bottom of the cart. Whether it was intentional, and Nadine would spend the next several days going back and forth on this, because it mattered. Because there was a difference between cruelty that was chosen and cruelty that was so automatic it didn't even need choosing. The towels went over the side of the cart in a slow, soft cascade and landed across the lobby floor. Laughter. Loud this time. Real this time. The kind that doesn't care who hears. "Oh no," Vanessa said, not sounding sorry at all. "Looks like you've got a little situation." Several hotel guests turned to look. A family near the concierge desk. A businessman who'd been on his phone. 2 young women waiting for the elevator, who immediately looked away the way people do when they're embarrassed on someone else's behalf and don't know what to do with that feeling. Nadine looked at the towels on the floor. She looked at the 3 women laughing. She felt something move through her that she didn't have a clean word for. Not quite anger, not quite grief. Something that lives underneath both of those, in the place where your pride used to feel safe before life taught you to protect it. She started to kneel. A polished black shoe appeared beside the nearest fallen towel. Not a hotel employee's shoe, not a guest shuffling past. A deliberate place-there shoe, belonging to someone who had moved across the lobby with the kind of quiet intention that doesn't announce itself. Nadine looked up. She didn't know his name yet. She would learn it soon, and learning it would explain a great many things she hadn't understood about the last few minutes. About why the concierge had gone pale, why the lobby manager had appeared from nowhere and was now hovering near the entrance to the lounge with the expression of a man who was trying to calculate exactly how much trouble was happening in real time. What she saw in that first look was a man in his mid-40s. Dark hair with gray coming in at the temples, the kind that didn't look accidental. A charcoal suit that wasn't flashy enough to be new money and was too perfectly fitted to be anything other than custom. Eyes that were, she would think about this later, surprisingly still. Not cold, not warm. Still. Like a room after everyone's left and you can finally hear what it actually sounds like. He crouched down. Without a word, without looking at anyone other than her, he picked up 2 of the folded towels and set them on the cart. The laughter had stopped. Nadine wasn't entirely sure when it had stopped, only that the silence in the lobby had a different texture now, the kind of silence that has weight to it, that people feel in their chests before they understand why. She picked up the remaining towels. Her hands were steady. She was grateful for that. When she straightened up, the man was standing beside her. He wasn't looking at Vanessa or Dominique or Camille. He was looking at Nadine. And there was something in that look, not pity. She would have registered pity and reacted badly to it. Something more like recognition, like he was confirming something he'd already known. Then he turned. "I'm sorry," he said to the 3 women in a voice that was completely, unnervingly calm. "Did one of you have something to say to her?" Vanessa blinked. "Excuse me?" "A moment ago, there was something funny." He waited, just waited, with no expression, the way a door waits. "I'd like to hear it again." Nobody laughed. Dominique opened her mouth and closed it. The lobby manager had appeared now, fully at the edge of the scene, but he wasn't looking at the women the way you'd look at guests who were complaining. He was looking at them the way you look at someone who has just stepped into a situation they don't yet understand and is about to. "We know her," Camille started. "From before," Vanessa added quickly. "From before," the man repeated. He nodded slowly, as if this was genuinely interesting to him. "And the towels?" No answer. "She works hard," he said. Not loudly, not with any particular heat, just as a statement of fact, the way you'd tell someone the time. "And you thought her work gave you something to laugh at." Vanessa straightened up. She was not a woman who was used to being spoken to this way, and something in her posture, the small recalibration of her shoulders, showed it. "I don't know who you think you are." Dante Moretti. The name landed in the lobby the way a stone lands in still water. The ripples were immediate. Vanessa's face changed. Dominique went very still. Camille looked at the floor. The concierge, who had worked at this hotel for 11 years and had seen things that would not improve anyone's opinion of human nature, excused himself quietly and walked toward his desk with the energy of a man who had decided he had seen nothing. Nadine did not know the name. She registered the reactions, the immediate, involuntary recalibration in the posture of everyone around her. But she didn't have the context yet for what those reactions meant. She would get it later, in pieces, the way you assemble a picture when you find the frame before the painting. What she knew in that moment was simpler and more immediate. This man had crossed a lobby full of people to pick up towels next to her. He had not asked what happened. He had not told her everything was fine. He had not performed sympathy. He had simply come and stood beside her. She didn't know what to do with that. She wasn't sure she'd ever had to figure out what to do with that before. Dante Moretti looked at the 3 women for another moment, not with anger, not with contempt, with something closer to assessment, the look of a man confirming a calculation he's already run. And then he said quietly and with complete finality, "I think we're done here." And somehow, impossibly, that was enough. Vanessa gathered her bag. Dominique touched her hair in that reflexive way people do when they need something to do with their hands. Camille followed without looking back, which was almost certainly the smartest choice any of the 3 made that afternoon. They left. The lobby started breathing again. Dante turned back to Nadine. Up close, there were lines around his eyes that didn't come from laughing too much. A small scar near his jaw that someone had worked to make less visible and had mostly succeeded. Hands that looked like they had done things other than sign documents. "You okay?" he asked. Nadine considered several answers. She settled on the honest one. "I was okay before you got there." She said it without hostility. Just as a fact, the same way he delivered his own. Something moved across his expression, fast. She almost missed it. "I know," he said. She looked at him for a moment, trying to read what he wasn't saying, and couldn't get there. Too many doors without handles. Thank you, she said finally. Because whatever else was complicated about this, he had helped her pick up towels, and that was something. He nodded. She pushed the cart toward the service corridor, and she told herself that was the end of it. She told herself that the strange, heavy quality in the lobby air was just adrenaline wearing off. She told herself she would probably never speak to him again, because that was the reasonable, logical conclusion to an encounter like this one. She was wrong on all three counts. But she wouldn't know that yet for several more hours, when Marcus would come find her in the break room with an expression she had never seen on him before, somewhere between impressed and genuinely unsettled, and tell her who she'd just thanked for picking up her towels. And the name, the second time she heard it, would mean something entirely different than it had the first. Marcus found her in the break room at 4:17 in the afternoon. Nadine knew it was 4:17 because she had been staring at the clock above the microwave for the past 6 minutes. Not because she cared what time it was, but because looking at the clock gave her something to do with her eyes that wasn't thinking about what had just happened in the lobby. The clock was safe. The clock didn't have opinions about her life choices. The clock didn't laugh. She had a cup of coffee in both hands that she hadn't drunk any of, and her cart was parked outside in the hallway because she hadn't been ready to go back out yet. And she was giving herself 5 more minutes before she made herself go back out. Because 5 minutes was reasonable. 5 minutes was what any person with working nerve endings would need after something like that. Marcus came through the door fast, the way he moved when something had gotten under his skin, and he was already talking before the door finished closing behind him. "Nadine, what did you do?" She looked at him over the rim of her coffee cup. "I got my towels knocked on the floor." "That's not what I'm talking about." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, but he sat down the wrong way, too forward, elbows on the table, the posture of someone who needs you to understand something before you can understand something else. "Who did you talk to?" "I talked to a lot of people. It's my job, Marcus." "The man in the lobby, the one who—" He stopped, ran a hand over the back of his neck. "Do you know who that was?" Nadine set down her coffee. She looked at Marcus properly now because his face was doing something she hadn't seen it do before, and Marcus was not a man who unsettled easily. He'd worked hotel security for 11 years before moving to facilities management. He'd seen a guest have a full cardiac event in the second-floor corridor and called the paramedics while simultaneously blocking 2 other guests from taking photographs. He didn't rattle. He was rattled now. "He said his name," she said. "Dante something." "Dante Moretti." "Right." Marcus stared at her for a moment like he was waiting for the recognition to land. When it didn't, he exhaled slowly through his nose. "You actually don't know." "Marcus, say the thing you're trying to say." He leaned closer, dropped his voice even though they were the only 2 people in the room. "Dante Moretti owns half the real estate on the east side of this city. Legitimate real estate, on paper. The other half of what he does is not something anybody talks about in a break room." He paused. "Or anywhere, really. You don't talk about it. You don't say his name in the wrong context. You don't look at him wrong. You don't—" He stopped again. "The manager, Hendricks, when someone told him Moretti was in the lobby, he went white, like actually white. I watched it happen." Nadine absorbed this. "He picked up my towels," she said. "I know. He defended me." "I know that too." Marcus sat back. "That's what I'm trying to figure out. Because that man does not cross lobbies for people. That man does not insert himself into situations. He comes. He has his meetings. He leaves. He's been coming here for months, and in 11 years of working in this building, I have never seen him so much as acknowledge a staff member beyond a nod." He looked at her steadily. "So what I'm asking you, and I need you to think about this carefully, is whether you have had any contact with this man before today. Anything, even something small that seemed like nothing." Nadine thought about it genuinely, the way Marcus's expression was asking her to. "No," she said. "I've never spoken to him before today." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay." "Okay?" "Okay, I believe you." He stood up, picked up her coffee cup, poured it down the sink, and replaced it with a fresh one from the pot that was still hot. Set it in front of her. "Drink that. And Nadine, whatever that was in the lobby today, be careful. Men like that don't do things without reasons, even the things that look like kindness." She wanted to tell him he was being dramatic. She started to, actually, had the sentence halfway formed. And then she thought about the way the room had gone silent when Dante Moretti said his own name, the way Vanessa's whole body had changed, the way the concierge had found something very important to do somewhere else immediately. She drank her coffee instead. She went back to work at 4:30, pushed her cart through the east corridor, restocked 2 rooms on the 9th floor, replaced a broken hairdryer in 912, and fielded a complaint from the guest in 917 about the noise from the adjacent room that turned out to be his own television reflected off the shared wall. Normal. All of it normal. The ordinary machinery of a hotel afternoon clicking along. She was in the service elevator going down to the supply room when the doors opened on the 4th floor and Dante Moretti stepped in. Nadine's hand tightened on the cart handle. He looked at her. She looked at him. The elevator doors closed. "I didn't follow you," he said, which was either the most reassuring or the least reassuring thing he could have said, depending on your disposition. "Okay," she said. "I have meetings on 4. I was heading down." He gestured at the panel, which showed he'd pressed L for lobby, which was 1 floor below the supply room she needed, which was technically plausible. "Okay," she said again. The elevator moved. It was a service elevator, which meant it was slower than the guest elevators and smelled faintly of cleaning solution and the ghost of someone's lunch. "Your friends," he said. "They're not my friends." "Your former friends." "That's more accurate." He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone thinking of the next thing to say, but the silence of someone who's comfortable with silence, which was its own kind of unusual in Nadine's experience. Most people filled silence like it was a hole that needed patching. "They hurt you," he said, not a question. "They embarrassed me." Nadine kept her eyes on the elevator doors. "Those aren't the same thing." "No," he said. "They're not." A beat. "But sometimes they feel the same." The elevator reached the supply level. The doors opened. Nadine pushed the cart forward and then stopped, because something made her stop, some instinct that she couldn't name but had learned over the years to at least acknowledge before overriding. She turned around. He was still watching her. Standing in the elevator with one hand resting loose at his side, the doors beginning their slow close around him. Not leaning, not performing casualness. Just standing the way some people stand when they don't need anything from the room they're in. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "In the lobby." The doors were almost closed now. She could only see a strip of him, the line of his jaw, the edge of his shoulder. "Because nobody else was going to," he said. The doors closed. Nadine stood in the supply room hallway for approximately 4 seconds, which was 3 seconds longer than she would have liked, and then she went to restock her cart and told herself very firmly that the conversation was interesting, and that was all it was. She almost convinced herself. The next morning, Nadine arrived for the 7 a.m. shift, which she didn't usually work, but Teresa had called out sick, and someone had to cover the lobby restocking before the morning rush, and Nadine needed the hours. The hotel at 7 a.m. was a different creature than the hotel at noon. Quieter, more honest, like a face before makeup. The lobby lights were at 60%. The breakfast service was just starting in the east dining room. The overnight cleaning crew was finishing the final pass on the marble floors. She was at the housekeeping station near the main entrance, sorting linens, when she heard the front desk clerk's voice go up half an octave. She didn't look right away. Front desk clerks went up half an octave for all kinds of reasons, most of them trivial. A billing discrepancy. A guest who'd lost their key card at 2 a.m. and was now exhausted and aggrieved about it. The ice machine on 7. Then she heard Vanessa Price's voice. "I need to speak to the general manager, right now." Nadine turned around slowly. Vanessa was at the front desk, and she looked different from yesterday. Yesterday she had been polished, assembled, the version of herself that faced the world. This morning there was something off in the assembly. The jacket was right, but her eyes were carrying something heavy, and she was gripping the edge of the desk with the fingertips of one hand in a way that was supposed to look casual and wasn't. Behind her, hovering slightly, was Dominique. No Camille. Nadine went very still and continued sorting linens, because sometimes the best intelligence is gathered by remembering that you are, to certain people, invisible. "Mr. Hendricks doesn't come in until 9, the front desk clerk said, in the careful voice of someone navigating a situation they hadn't been trained for. "Then get me whoever is here," Vanessa said. I need to discuss something that happened in this hotel yesterday, and I need to discuss it with someone who has actual authority. If you'd like to leave your name and contact, I left my name and contact at the Alderton Group, Vanessa said, and something in her voice had shifted, lost a layer of the performance, gotten rawer underneath. And this morning I received a call informing me that the partnership review scheduled for next Thursday has been indefinitely postponed because of a conversation that happened in this lobby. Nadine's hands slowed on the linens. The partnership review, Dominique said, from slightly behind Vanessa's left shoulder, and her voice had a quality Nadine had never heard from her before. Tight, almost frightened. She's been working on that account for 8 months. And the Alderton Group is connected to... Vanessa stopped herself, looked at the front desk clerk like she'd just remembered where she was and who was listening, dropped her voice to something that was supposed to be private, but in a quiet lobby at 7 a.m. carried just fine. We need to speak to someone who can tell us what was said about us after we left yesterday. The front desk clerk said she would call the duty manager. Nadine put down the linen she was holding and walked to the service corridor because she needed somewhere to be that wasn't the lobby, because what she was feeling was complicated and she needed to not be feeling it in front of an audience. The service corridor was fluorescent lit and smelled like industrial detergent. She leaned against the wall beside the linen trolley and breathed. She hadn't done anything. She hadn't asked Dante Moretti to step in. She hadn't said a word to anyone about Vanessa or the partnership or the Alderton Group, whatever that was. She had cleaned her floors and gone home and made pasta and watched a documentary about migratory birds until she fell asleep on the couch. And somehow Vanessa was losing an 8-month partnership. She knew in some quiet part of herself that this was connected to yesterday. She wasn't naive. She'd seen the way the room had changed when Dante said his name. She understood that when a man like that, whatever kind of man that was, decided something had gone wrong, the correction didn't come with a conversation. It came with consequences. But knowing it and knowing what to do about it were two different countries. She was still standing in the corridor when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. "Miss Brooks?" The voice was smooth, unhurried, male, and not Dante Moretti. "Mr. Moretti would like to know if you'd be available for coffee this afternoon, 4 o'clock, the Meridian Lounge." Nadine looked at the fluorescent light above her head. "He's asking?" she said. A pause. "He is." "Tell him I'll think about it." Another pause, slightly longer this time, which told her that "I'll think about it" was not a response this particular person was accustomed to relaying. "Of course," he said finally, with the professionalism of someone who had been well-trained to not react. "He'll await your response." The call ended. Nadine put her phone in her pocket and went back to the lobby. Vanessa and Dominique were gone. The duty manager, a competent woman named Ria, who Nadine had always liked for her directness, was standing at the front desk with the front desk clerk, and they were having a conversation in low voices that stopped when Nadine walked back in. Ria looked at Nadine. Nadine looked at Ria. "You doing okay?" Ria asked. "Fine," Nadine said. "Why?" Ria pressed her lips together like she was making a decision. "Two of the guests from yesterday came in this morning to complain." She paused. "About what happened. They knocked my towels on the floor." "I know that. I've seen the lobby footage." Ria's voice was careful and even, and underneath it was something that Nadine recognized as the particular tone of a person managing upward simultaneously with managing down. "I also know that Dante Moretti was present and that he chose to involve himself. And I want you to know that whatever happens in the next few days with those guests, this hotel's position is that you did nothing wrong." Nadine studied her. "What's going to happen in the next few days with those guests?" Ria was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "I think it's better if you don't know the specifics." Ria. "Nadine, I'm telling you that you're protected. Please take that, and don't ask me to explain the mechanism." It was the most direct thing Nadine had heard from a manager in 6 years, and it landed with the weight of something that had already been decided somewhere above both of their pay grades. She went back to work. At 3:45, she texted the unknown number. "Fine. 4 o'clock. She told herself it was because she had questions, which was true. It was also true that she was curious in the specific way you're curious about a fire. From a distance that you keep carefully calibrated, close enough to see what's burning, far enough to not be part of it. The Meridian Lounge was the quieter side of the hotel's ground floor, the side the guests who didn't want to be seen tended to use. Dark wood, low lighting, booths with high backs that offered the illusion of privacy even in a shared space. It was the kind of room where money sat comfortably and noise didn't. Dante Moretti was already there when she arrived. He'd taken the booth nearest the window that faced the interior garden, a seat that let him see the room without being directly visible from the entrance, which she noticed and filed away without comment. He was not in a suit today. Dark trousers, a shirt that was simple and expensive in the way that simple, expensive things pretended not to be. No briefcase. No phone on the table. He stood when she approached, which she hadn't expected. She sat down across from him. The server appeared within seconds, which was not how the server appeared for regular hotel guests, and she ordered black coffee and watched the server disappear with a speed that felt calibrated. "You thought about it," Dante said. "I think about everything," she said. "It's a habit." He almost smiled. Not quite. "Is that so?" "What did you do?" she asked. She hadn't planned to lead with it, but sitting across from him in this booth with the low light and the coffee coming, she realized that small talk was going to feel absurd, and she'd rather have the uncomfortable conversation than the comfortable performance of avoiding it. He looked at her with those still eyes. "What do you think I did?" "I think Vanessa Price came into this hotel at 7 this morning in a state of controlled panic about a business partnership that apparently dissolved overnight. I think Dominique Hall was with her and looked like she hadn't slept, and I think it's not a coincidence." Dante folded his hands on the table. "The Alderton Group does business with several of my companies. They conduct their own due diligence on the professional environments of partners they engage with." He paused. "Someone sent them a copy of yesterday's lobby security footage." "Did you?" "I didn't send anyone anything." He said it without looking away. "Someone who works for me saw something they found relevant to a relationship audit they were conducting and acted accordingly." Nadine looked at him for a long moment. The coffee arrived. She wrapped her hands around the cup. "That's a very carefully worded sentence," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is. You're telling me you didn't order it, but you're not telling me you didn't allow it." He was quiet. "And Camille?" Nadine asked. "The third one. She wasn't with them this morning." "Camille Okafor has been attempting for several months to secure an invitation to a private investment event," Dante said. "That invitation has been withdrawn." Nadine set her coffee cup down. She didn't say anything for a moment because what she was feeling was not one simple thing, and she'd learned enough about herself over the years to know that when feelings were not simple, speaking fast was usually a mistake. "I need you to hear me clearly," she said finally. "I'm listening. Those women were cruel to me yesterday. They have been cruel to me before yesterday, in smaller ways over longer time. And there is a part of me—" She stopped, breathed. "There is a part of me that looked at Vanessa's face this morning and felt something that I am not proud of. Because I'm human. I felt it." Dante said nothing. "But I need you to understand that I did not want this," she said. "I don't want to be the reason someone loses a partnership. I don't want consequences handed out on my behalf by people I didn't ask to act on my behalf. I am not something to be defended like a piece of territory." The silence between them was not empty. It was full of something she couldn't categorize, some quality of being genuinely heard that she wasn't used to from men with power, who usually listened only long enough to formulate their response. Dante said, "You're right." Nadine blinked. "I should have told you what was likely to happen before it happened," he said. "That was a failure on my part." He said it the way you say something you mean, without the inflection of performance. "What I cannot do is tell you that the situation would have been allowed to stand unchanged, because it wouldn't have been." "Why?" she asked. "Why does it matter to you? You don't know me." He looked at her then with the first expression that didn't feel managed, something that cracked slightly at the edges of all that stillness. Not emotion exactly, more like the space where emotion had been sitting for a while and had worn a groove. "I know more about you than you'd be comfortable knowing," he said. Something cold moved through her. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer immediately. He turned the coffee cup in front of him. He'd been drinking espresso, she noticed, not touched it since she sat down. A small, circular motion that seemed more like buying time than a genuine gesture. "I've been coming to this hotel," he said slowly, "for 7 months. "I know. Marcus told me you have meetings here." I have some meetings here. He paused. I also came on days when I had no meetings. Nadine went very still. Last November, he said, there was a wallet. A guest dropped it in the lobby near the east entrance. You found it behind the cart. You held it for 6 minutes. I watched the clock. And during those 6 minutes, I watched you open it, look at the identification, look at the cash inside it, close it again, and bring it to the front desk. You didn't take anything. He looked at her steadily. The wallet had $400 in it. She remembered the wallet. She remembered the cash. She remembered the choice taking approximately 2 seconds and feeling like no choice at all. I do the job I'm paid to do, she said. Yes. He leaned forward very slightly. But you do it the same way whether or not anyone is watching. And in this hotel, among these people, he glanced briefly at the room around them, the quiet wealth of it, the careful performance of it, that is not as common as you would hope. Nadine's heart was doing something it wasn't supposed to do in a conversation that was supposed to be confrontational. She reoriented it by force of will and focused. You were watching me, she said, for months without introducing yourself or saying anything. Yes. That's not a compliment, Mr. Moretti. That is a thing that has a word. I know. He sat back. I'm not asking you to find it flattering. I'm asking you to understand that whatever you think of how I've operated, my intention was never to make you uncomfortable or to treat you as something less than what you are. And what am I? He looked at her. Someone worth knowing. She sat with that for a moment. Let it be what it was without deciding immediately what it meant. You still should have introduced yourself, she said. I know that too. Something in his voice shifted, went quieter. Men like me don't always... He stopped. Seemed to reconsider the sentence, started again. I have spent a very long time in rooms where people know who I am before I open my mouth, where the introduction is already over before it starts. And you were... He paused again. Different. You didn't know. And I found I wanted to keep that, to be in a room with someone who looked at me without the information. Nadine looked at the window. The interior garden was lit by the late afternoon light going golden through the glass. She was aware that this conversation had moved into territory that she hadn't planned to enter, and that there was a version of her that should stand up right now and go home and put this entire day in a box and close the lid. She was also aware that she wasn't going to do that, not because of what Dante Moretti was, or what he could do, or what she had watched happen to Vanessa Price in the span of 12 hours, but because of the elevator, because of nobody else was going to. Because of the specific quality of being looked at by someone who was seeing you, not the uniform, not the cart, not the invisible infrastructure of the room you were maintaining. She was aware that this was dangerous. She was aware that she was going to have this conversation anyway. I need you to tell me the truth about something, she said. If I can. What do you do? Not the real estate, not the meetings, the other part. The lounge was quiet around them. A couple at a table near the far wall. The server behind the bar. Nobody close enough to matter. Dante looked at his hands, then back at her. I run a criminal organization, he said. Not proudly, not apologetically, like a doctor naming a diagnosis. I have run it for 19 years. I am very good at it. I have also been in the process, for the last 3 years, of trying to disentangle myself from it in ways that don't get me or anyone I care about killed. A pause. It is going slowly. Nadine absorbed this. Why are you telling me that? She asked. Because you asked. Most people lie. Most people who ask the question already know the answer and are testing whether you'll lie, he said. You didn't know the answer. That's different. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm not going to be part of that world. I know. I'm not going to look the other way or pretend I don't know what you're describing. If you think that's something I'd do, Nadine. He said her name for the first time, and it landed differently than she expected. Not like a possession, not like a performance, like something handled carefully. I know. She looked at him. He looked at her. And somewhere in the 6 feet of table between them, something shifted that was not going to shift back. Not because of fireworks or declarations or any of the machinery of romantic narrative, but because of the simple, irreducible fact that 2 people had told each other true things and the other person had stayed at the table. That was the moment. She knew it was the moment. She would not have been able to say what it was the moment of exactly. Not love, not trust, not safety, None of the clean words. Something more like the decision to see what this was. The terrifying, irreversible decision to find out. Outside in the lobby, the evening shift was starting. Nadine could hear the slight shift in ambient noise that came with the change of crews, the housekeeping carts, the adjustment in pace. Her shift had ended 40 minutes ago. She should have gone home an hour before she came here. She picked up her coffee cup. "I'll be back tomorrow," she said, "for the afternoon shift. I'm covering for Teresa again." She paused. "And the day after that?" Dante said nothing, watched her. "If you wanted to have coffee again," she said carefully, "you could probably find me here." She set the cup down and stood up. He stood when she did, same as before, and she thought again that she hadn't expected that. She walked out of the Meridian Lounge, across the marble lobby that she had polished 10,000 times, past the front desk where the evening clerk gave her a small nod, and through the employee exit into the early evening. She stood on the sidewalk. The air was cooler than it had been all day. Traffic moved past at the volume of a city that didn't care about the magnitude of what had just happened inside that building. Someone was selling pretzels from a cart on the corner. A taxi honked. Nadine stood there for a moment, in the regular, indifferent noise of the world, and she thought about what Marcus had said. Men like that don't do things without reasons, even the things that look like kindness. She thought about the wallet, the $400, the choice that had felt like no choice at all. She thought about Vanessa's face at 7 this morning, stripped of its usual assembly. And the thing Nadine had felt seeing it, the thing she hadn't been proud of, and whether feeling it made her someone she didn't want to be, or just someone who had been hurt long enough that relief had its own complicated taste. She didn't resolve any of it. She just stood on the sidewalk, in the cooling air, and let it all be unresolved, because some things need to be lived with before they can be understood. And she was 32 years old, and she had learned by now that the moments that change your life never feel large enough when you're standing inside them. Somewhere behind her, in a lounge with dark wood and low light, a man who had spent 19 years making powerful people afraid of him. Sat alone with a cup of espresso he still hadn't touched, and thought about a woman who had told him the truth without flinching, and wondered if it was too late to become someone worth the honesty. He didn't know yet. Neither did she. But the question had been asked now. And questions like that, once asked, do not go quietly back into the silence they came from. They stay. They wait. They demand an answer. And in the morning, the lobby would need cleaning, and the linen would need sorting, and the world would reassemble itself around the ordinary machinery of another day. And somewhere inside that ordinary day, a door had opened that had not been open yesterday. What was on the other side of it, neither of them could see, but they were both, for the first time in a very long time, willing to look. 3 days passed. Nadine covered Teresa's shifts on Wednesday and Thursday, and on both days Dante Moretti appeared in the Meridian Lounge at 4 o'clock with an espresso. He barely touched, and enough patience to make her feel, uncomfortably, like she was the one being waited for rather than the other way around. They talked for 40 minutes on Wednesday and an hour and 10 on Thursday, and the conversations were not what she had expected. She had expected to feel managed. She had expected the careful deployment of charm by someone who had spent decades using people's needs against them. What she got instead was a man who asked more questions than he answered and listened to the answers with a quality of attention she associated with people who had learned, at some cost, that listening was more valuable than speaking. He asked about her mother. She told him about the medications, the small apartment in Glendale, the way her mother still kept a container of cookies on the counter for guests, even though guests rarely came anymore, because the habit was from another time, and habits that come from love are the last ones to go. He didn't say anything sentimental about it. He just said quietly that he understood about habits from another time, and she believed him. She asked about his family. He said his father had died when he was 23, which was the same year he'd made the decisions that built the empire he was now trying to dismantle. He said it without asking for sympathy, just naming the sequence, the way you name a cause before an effect. She noticed he didn't mention his mother. She didn't push. On Friday she didn't see him, and she noticed that she noticed, which told her something about where things had gotten to that she needed to sit with. On Saturday morning, 2 things happened. The first, Marcus found her at the housekeeping station at 8 a.m. with a look on his face that had graduated from unsettled to something she would have called, if pressed, afraid. "You need to see something," he said. He showed her on his phone, a photograph taken from what looked like across a street, slightly blurred, the kind of shot that wasn't meant to be artistic. It was meant to document. The photograph showed a woman leaving the Crown Meridian's employee entrance. The woman was Nadine. The timestamp in the corner read, Thursday, 5:43 p.m. She looked at Marcus. Who took this? I don't know. It was sent to hotel management's general email this morning, anonymous. He took the phone back. There was a message with it. What did it say? He looked at her for a moment, deciding something. Then he read it. It said, you should know who your staff is spending time with. Ask her about Dante Moretti. The lobby around them went about its business. A cart rolling past, the morning crew changing over, the distant sound of the breakfast service. Nadine absorbed the message the way you absorb something cold, slowly, from the outside in. Someone is watching this building, she said, or they were watching you specifically. Marcus, I'm not blaming you. He put the phone away. But Nadine, this is not a normal situation. You understand that, right? This isn't, whatever this is, it's not like anything I've dealt with in 11 years here. What did management do with the email? Rhea flagged it and sent it to the hotel's security contractor and then called me because she knew I'd want to know before you started your shift. He paused. She's not going to make it your problem officially, but unofficially, he stopped. Unofficially what? She asked me if you were safe. Nadine was quiet. Are you? Marcus asked. She thought about the photograph, the timestamp. Thursday at 5:43, which was 11 minutes after she had left the Meridian Lounge. Whoever had taken it had known she would be leaving from that entrance at approximately that time, which meant either they had been watching the building all day and gotten lucky, or they had known something about her schedule. Neither option was particularly comfortable. I'll talk to him, she said. Talk to... Marcus stopped himself, pressed his lips together. Of course you will. He didn't say it unkindly, just with the resignation of someone who had already seen how this particular calculation was going to resolve. The second thing that happened on Saturday morning was that Camille Okafor walked into the Crown Meridian at 9:15, not with Vanessa, not with Dominique, alone, and she looked it. There was a quality of solo exposure to her that the group had insulated against on Tuesday. Without the armor of the other two, she was smaller somehow. Still beautiful, still put together in the way that had always been Camille's particular skill, but something in the architecture of her usual confidence had developed a crack that the makeup didn't fully cover. Nadine saw her first. Camille saw Nadine at almost the same moment, and for a second, just a second, something moved across Camille's face that wasn't contempt. Then the second passed and Camille crossed the lobby toward her. I need to talk to you, Camille said. Nadine studied her. This isn't a great time. I know. I don't care. Camille's voice was low and tight, the voice of someone holding something together that wanted very badly to fall apart. Can we... Is there somewhere? Not here. Not in the middle of the lobby. Nadine looked at her for a long moment, reading what she could. Camille's hands were still. Her breathing wasn't. 10 minutes, Nadine said. The East Sitting Room. Nobody uses it before 11. The East Sitting Room was a small lounge off the main corridor, furnished for guests who needed a quiet phone call or a moment away from the lobby's performance of grandeur. 2 armchairs, a low table, a window that looked out on the side street. Nadine stood near the window. Camille took one of the chairs and then seemed to realize she was sitting when Nadine was standing and started to stand back up. Sit, Nadine said. Camille sat. What happened to your investment event access wasn't my doing, Nadine said, before Camille could start wherever she'd planned to start. I know that. Then what do you want? Camille looked at her hands for a moment. She was wearing less jewelry than Tuesday. No stacked bracelets, just one thin ring on her right hand. Small thing to notice, but Nadine had spent 6 years reading rooms and the people in them, and small things were how rooms communicated. I want to warn you, Camille said. Nadine waited. Vanessa. Camille looked up. She's not... What happened with the Alderton group? She's not treating it as a professional setback. She's treating it as a personal attack. And when Vanessa decides something is personal... She stopped, pressed her fingers flat against her knee. She has a husband, Garrett Price. He runs the Heron Group, which is a private consulting firm, which is... It sounds like what it is, which is boring, but the consulting is for people who need information about other people. The kind of information you pay for privately. Nadine felt something move down her spine, slowly, like cold water. She's having you looked into, Camille said. Both of you, you and Moretti, but you especially because… She stopped again. Because she thinks you're the lever. She thinks if she finds something on you, something that makes the hotel let you go, that breaks the connection, and then without the connection, she thinks she gets her partnership back. Or she gets close enough to someone who can give it back. Camille's voice had lost most of its social smoothness. What was left was something rawer and more honest than anything Nadine had heard from her in 15 years. I'm not here because I feel guilty. I mean, I do. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because Vanessa is going to do something stupid, and I don't want to be anywhere near it when she does. Nadine looked at her steadily. Why tell me instead of just staying out of it? Camille held her gaze for a moment. Then she said very quietly, because you were decent to me back then. You were always decent to me, even when I wasn't worth it. She stopped. And I walked into that lobby on Tuesday and laughed at you. And I have been thinking about that for 4 days, and I can't make it smaller than it is. The east sitting room was quiet. Traffic moved past outside the window, indifferent. Nadine considered several things simultaneously. The photograph from this morning, Marcus's face. The feeling in her chest right now that was trying to be manageable and wasn't quite succeeding. And underneath all of it, the knowledge that she had walked into something whose dimensions she still didn't fully understand, with a man whose world operated by rules she hadn't read. Does Vanessa know you're here? She asked. No. Does Dominique? No. Camille stood up. She picked up her bag with the careful movements of someone trying to hold on to their composure with both hands. I told you what I came to tell you. What you do with it is yours. She paused at the sitting room door, didn't turn around. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For Tuesday. I was following Vanessa's lead and I knew better and I did it anyway, and I'm sorry. She left. Nadine stood at the window and watched the side street outside go about its Saturday morning without her. A couple walking a dog. A delivery truck blocking the lane with its hazards going. Someone standing outside a building across the street, arms folded, looking at a phone. She looked at the person across the street more carefully. They were looking at the hotel entrance, not at their phone. The phone was covered. Nadine stepped back from the window. She found the duty manager's extension on her work phone, called it, asked Ria to check whether the exterior cameras on the east side of the building were recording, confirmed that they were, gave her a description of the person across the street, and then hung up and called the number she had saved in her personal phone under the letter D. It rang once. Nadine. His voice was the same as it was in the lounge, measured, unhurried. It was 8 hours earlier than they usually spoke, and he answered like he'd been expecting the call. Someone is watching the building, she said. I think they've been watching me specifically. Management received an anonymous photograph this morning of me leaving Thursday evening with a note asking about my connection to you. She paused. And I've just been told that Vanessa Price has retained some kind of information service to investigate both of us. Silence on the line. Not the silence of surprise. The silence of someone running a calculation. Where are you right now? Now? He asked. East sitting room, ground floor. Stay there. Don't go back to the lobby. Another pause. And Nadine, did you get a look at the person outside? Enough of one. Male or female? Male. Heavy build. Dark jacket. Something changed in his voice. A very slight compression, the kind that happens when information confirms something you'd hoped to be wrong about. He said, I'll call you back in 10 minutes, and ended the call. He called back in 7. The person on the street is no longer there, he said. I need you to listen to me carefully. I'm listening. The situation with Vanessa Price has developed a complication that I did not anticipate. His voice was still controlled, but underneath the control was something she hadn't heard from him before. Not quite alarm, but its more experienced cousin. The Heron Group is not a simple information service. Garrett Price's firm has historically operated in a gray area between private consulting and activities that don't bear close examination. They work for people who can pay for results rather than just reports. He paused. I was aware of the Heron Group before this week. I was not aware of a direct connection to Vanessa Price. You didn't know who she was married to, Nadine said. I knew who she was professionally. I did not run a full personal background. A pause that felt like it cost him something. That was a mistake. She sat with that for a moment. Dante Moretti using the word mistake without dressing it up. What does that mean for... She started. It means that what I thought was a manageable social consequence has the potential to become something more operational. He said the word operational the way people say medical, with the particular gravity of someone who has learned that the vocabulary of their world does not always translate comfortably into civilian language. I need to make some calls, and I need to ask you something. Ask. A pause. Are you afraid? She sat with that question honestly. Let it sit. Let herself feel the actual answer rather than the answer she'd prefer to give. Yes, she said, but I'm more angry than afraid. Something shifted in his voice. Not warmth exactly, something older than warmth. Good, he said. Hold on to that. And then, I'm going to fix this. Dante. She said his name deliberately, and she heard the small change in his breathing that told her the sound of it from her still meant something to him. Don't fix it in a way that makes it worse. Don't fix it in a way I'm going to have to not ask about. A long pause. I'll do what I can within those parameters, he said. That's not a yes. No, he said. It's not. He hung up. Nadine sat in the east sitting room for another 5 minutes. Then she went back to work, because the linen wasn't going to sort itself, and the world didn't pause for the particular variety of complicated she was currently inside. And doing the job was the one thing she knew how to do when everything else had the texture of standing on ground that wasn't sure about itself. She made it through the rest of the shift on the specific resource of not thinking about anything beyond the next immediate task. It was a skill she'd developed at 23 when her father died, and she'd had to plan a funeral and notify creditors and manage her mother's grief and her own simultaneously, and she'd discovered that the human brain, when given no other option, was capable of a very narrow and functional kind of focus that got things done even when everything beneath it was coming apart. She clocked out at 3, changed in the locker room, walked out the employee entrance, and automatically, without meaning to, scanned the street across from her before she'd taken 2 steps. No one with a phone used as cover, no dark jacket standing too still. She exhaled. She had gotten 2 blocks toward the subway when the car pulled up alongside her. Not a dramatic pull-up, not the screech of tires variety, just a dark car, moving at walking pace, and then stopped, and the window came down, and the man behind the wheel was someone she didn't know. Young, square-jawed, professional, in the manner of someone trained to be invisible in most environments. Miss Brooks. He said it quietly, just loud enough to reach her, and no further. Mr. Moretti would like you to use the car this evening, for your safety. Nadine looked at the car, looked at the driver, looked at the street around her, the ordinary Saturday afternoon street, the hardware store, the dry cleaners, the people moving past with their groceries and their dogs and their unremarkable lives. She thought about the photograph, the timestamp, the man outside the hotel with the phone that wasn't really a phone. She got in the car, which was the moment she had been trying to delay without admitting she was delaying it, the moment of crossing from the world she understood into the adjacent world she had been told existed, the one that operated underneath the visible surface of everything, that had its own rules and its own geography and its own version of what words like safety and consequence and risk actually meant. She got in. The driver said nothing else. The car moved. It took her to a building on the west side of the city that was not a hotel and not an office, that looked from the outside like a converted warehouse that someone had spent considerable money converting tastefully. A private elevator, 8th floor. A space that felt like someone's home, but also, somehow, like a room that was never entirely off duty. Dante was on the phone when she walked in, standing near the windows with his back to the room, and the conversation he was having was not in English, Italian, she thought, or something close, rapid and low, and she couldn't follow the language, but she could follow the tone, which was not the tone he used with her. It was harder, stripped of the consideration that characterized everything else she'd heard from him. It was the tone of a man reminding someone of something they should not have needed reminding of. He ended the call when he heard her come in, turned around. He looked tired. Not sleepy tired, the other kind. Sit down, he said. She sat. He moved to the chair across from her and sat too, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, which was the first time she'd seen him in a posture that wasn't fully composed. And the uncomposure of it made the next thing he said land harder than it might have otherwise. The Heron group was already watching me, he said. Before Tuesday, before the lobby, before Vanessa Price decided she had a grievance. Nadine went still. Garrett Price has been building a case, Dante said. Not for Vanessa, for himself. For whoever he's been building it for, which is not an entity I had fully identified until this afternoon. He looked at her. There is a federal investigation, preliminary stage, looking at the intersection of legitimate real estate and... He stopped, chose the next words carefully, and things that don't belong in federal investigative reports. They're investigating you, she said. They've been investigating me for some time. What is new? He paused, and what was in his face now was the thing she'd been wondering if she would ever actually see from him. Something genuine and undefended, something that had the quality of regret that costs more than you expected. What is new is that Garrett Price, who has connections I was not fully aware of, has apparently provided photographs of you, entering and exiting this building, entering and exiting the hotel, photographs of our conversations in the lounge. The air in the room seemed to adjust. They're looking at me, she said slowly, feeling the shape of the words before she said them. They're looking at whether you constitute an asset, Dante said, or a vulnerability. She sat with that. An asset. A vulnerability. The clinical vocabulary of a world she had not asked to enter, applied to a woman who cleaned hotel rooms and returned lost wallets and made pasta at night and called her mother on Sundays. Applied to her. How long have they had the photographs? She voice was level. She was proud of that, and she was also aware of being proud of it, which meant some part of her was still performing even now, still managing the appearance of being okay, and she told that part of herself to be quiet. At least 3 weeks, Dante said. She did the math without wanting to. 3 weeks ago, they had been having coffee for the second time. 3 weeks ago, she had been figuring out what she thought about this man, whether he was something she wanted to understand, and someone had been photographing that process from across the street. 3 weeks of her life, the private, tentative, internal work of deciding something, had been documented and filed and categorized. What happens to me? She asked. If you have done nothing wrong, I haven't. Then in normal circumstances, you would be a peripheral figure who gets interviewed once and released from interest. He held her gaze. These are not normal circumstances. Garrett Price has a specific reason to make you useful to people who want information about me. And if he can make you appear to be more connected to my operations than you are... He stopped. He can use me to pressure you, she said. Yes? She stood up. She didn't know she was going to stand up until she was doing it. She walked to the window and looked at the city below. The ordinary, oblivious city, all its thousands of lit windows going about Saturday evening. And she put one hand flat on the glass, and she breathed. Behind her, Dante said nothing. He waited the way he always waited, with that specific quality of patience that she had initially read as control, and was now beginning to understand was something closer to discipline. The hard-won ability to not fill silence with something cheaper than what the moment needed. She turned around. You knew this was possible, she said, not this specifically, but the general shape of it. You knew that being around you put people around you at risk. Yes, and you let it get this far anyway. He held her gaze, didn't look away. Yes. Why? The question sat in the room. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had been asked a question he knows the answer to and is deciding whether the answer is something he has the right to say out loud. Because I was selfish, he said finally. Because you were something I wanted, and I had spent a very long time not letting myself want things that weren't useful, and I... He stopped. I convinced myself that I was being careful enough, that the distance was adequate, that the risk was manageable. He looked at his hands, then back at her. I was wrong, and you are the one paying for it. Nadine stood by the window and looked at this man. This genuinely dangerous, genuinely lonely, genuinely remorseful man. And she felt something that was not simple enough to name cleanly. Not anger alone, not hurt alone. Something that contained both and also, underneath both, The particular exhaustion of being a person who had spent her whole life being careful and responsible and honest and finding out again and again that the world did not specifically reward those qualities, that you could do every right thing and still end up standing in someone else's consequences. I need to know what you're going to do, she said. I'm going to make sure you are not touched by this. That's not specific enough. No, he said, it's not. Because I don't know yet. Because I found out 2 hours ago, and I am working with incomplete information, and I am... He stopped. His jaw moved. I am trying to think clearly about something that makes it very difficult to think clearly. She looked at him. Are you scared? He met her eyes. Of what happens to you, he said. Yes. Not of the investigation, not of Garrett Price or federal interest or the slow dismantling of an empire he'd built over 19 years. Of what happens to her. She crossed the room. She sat back down across from him. She put her hands flat on her knees and she looked at him directly, the way she looked at difficult things she'd decided to deal with rather than avoid. Then here's what we're going to do, she said. You're going to tell me everything, not the managed version, not what you've decided I need to know, everything. And I'm going to decide with actual information what I want to do next. She paused. Because I am not going to be a variable in someone else's calculation. Not yours, not Garrett Price's, not the federal government's. I am a person making a choice, and I need real information to make a real choice. Dante looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, This is going to take a while. I have time, she said. He nodded. And he started talking, really talking, not the careful parceled versions he'd offered across lounge tables with espresso going cold between them, but the full unmanaged truth of 19 years. And as he spoke, the room got darker around them because neither of them thought to turn on a light, and the city went on outside the window making its Saturday night noise. And Nadine sat across from him and listened with everything she had, because this was the thing she had demanded, and she was going to receive it with the same honesty she'd asked him to deliver it with. And somewhere in the middle of his 3rd year, the year things had become irreversible, the year he'd understood what he'd built and built it anyway. She felt something settle in her chest that was not comfort and was not peace, but was the specific sensation of seeing something clearly for the first time, of a picture finally containing all its parts, and knowing that what she did with the picture was entirely, inescapably, terrifyingly hers to decide. He talked for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Nadine knew the exact duration because at some point her phone had buzzed with a low battery warning and she had looked at the time before silencing it. And later, when Dante finally stopped speaking, she checked it again, and the math was 2 hours and 40 minutes of the fullest picture she had ever been given of another human being's life. Not the curated version, not the version designed to make her feel a particular way, but the actual layered, contradictory, sometimes genuinely ugly truth of how a man becomes something he did not entirely intend to become, and then spends years trying to figure out if the becoming can be undone. She didn't say much while he talked. She asked 2 questions. Both times he answered without hesitating, which told her more than the answers themselves. When he finished, the room was fully dark. Neither of them had moved to turn on a light, and the city outside the window was doing its late Saturday night thing. The particular quality of noise that belongs to a city after midnight, lower and less certain than the daytime version, like the city was thinking out loud. Nadine sat in the dark across from a man she had known for less than 2 weeks, and felt, with a clarity that was almost uncomfortable, that she understood him better than she had understood people she'd known for years. Not completely, not safely, but in the specific way you understand something when you've seen its actual structure rather than its presented surface. She said, "What happens Monday?" He looked at her. In the city light coming through the window, his face was mostly shadow with edges. "Monday a meeting happens that I have been trying to delay and can no longer delay. Garrett Price has been working as an intermediary. The people he's been building information for, they want a conversation." "What kind of conversation?" "The kind where they tell me what they have and I decide what I'm willing to give them in exchange for what they don't use." "They're going to try to leverage you." "Yes. And I'm part of what they have." A pause. "Photographs. Records of our conversations as reported by a secondary source. Nothing criminal, because there is nothing criminal to find." He said it without looking away. "But they don't need criminal. They need useful. And a woman with no connection to my world who appears to have a connection to me, is useful, she said. Yes. Nadine breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth, the deliberate breath of someone who is managing something that does not want to be managed. I'm coming to that meeting, she said. No. He said it immediately, with a flatness that was not anger but was close to it. I'm not asking. Nadine, I am not going to sit somewhere waiting to find out what was decided about me, she said. I am not going to be a piece that gets moved without being consulted. You told me everything tonight because I demanded real information so I could make real choices. This is a real choice. I'm coming. He was quiet for a long moment. She could see the tension in his shoulders, even in the low light, the specific quality of stillness that meant he was working very hard to not respond the way his instincts were telling him to respond. These are not people who will be impressed by your presence, he said carefully. I'm not going to impress them. I'm going to make it clear to them that I am a person with standing in this situation, not a variable. She leaned forward slightly. And if they're going to make calculations about me, they should make them with me in the room. Another long pause. You understand, he said, that I cannot fully protect you in that room. I know. And you're saying yes anyway. I'm saying yes anyway. He looked at her for a moment in the dark. Then he said very quietly, You're the most stubborn person I have ever encountered. You're surrounded by people who are afraid of you, she said. That's not the same as meeting stubborn. Something crossed his face that was tired and almost fond and weighted with things she didn't have language for yet. Monday, he said, 11 a.m. You will be with me the entire time. You will not speak unless I indicate that it's appropriate. And if I tell you to leave the room, you leave. If I agree that leaving is the right call, she said. He closed his eyes briefly. Nadine, that's my offer. He accepted it because he didn't have another option, and they both knew it. She slept on a guest couch with a blanket Dante retrieved from a hall closet without being asked, because it was too late to go home, and the situation outside the building had not been declared clear, and she slept badly, but she slept, which was more than she had expected from herself. Sunday passed in a specific kind of suspended tension, the tension of knowing something is coming and being unable to accelerate its arrival. Dante made calls in rooms she wasn't in, emerged with less information on his face each time, which told her the calls were not going well, and he was getting better at not showing it, which was in its own way more worrying than if he'd looked openly concerned. She called her mother in the afternoon. Normal call. How are you feeling? Did you take the afternoon medication? Yes, I'm fine. I'm just at a friend's place. Yes, a friend, Mom. Stop. I'll call you Tuesday. She called Marcus. He answered on the first ring, which meant he'd been waiting. I'm fine, she said. Sure you are. His voice was careful. Where are you? Somewhere safe. A pause. Is it the kind of safe that I should be worried about, or the kind of safe that I shouldn't ask questions about? Probably both, she said honestly. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You know I've got your back, right? Whatever this is. I know. And you know that I think you have extremely questionable judgment about which fires to walk into. I know that too. Okay, he said. Call me Tuesday. Or Monday if it goes sideways. How will you know if it goes sideways? Because you'll call me Monday, he said, and hung up. Monday arrived the way significant days often arrive, looking exactly like any other morning until you're inside it. And then every ordinary detail becomes strange, with the weight of what the day contains. 7 a.m. light through the west-facing windows, the sound of the building around her, the smell of coffee that Dante had made and set on the kitchen counter without ceremony, the small, uncomplicated kindness of it. She wore her own clothes because she'd had a change in her bag, a habit from years of keeping an extra set at work in case of spills. Dark trousers, a clean white shirt, the blazer she kept for job interviews and difficult meetings. Simple. Hers. Dante looked at her when she came into the kitchen and didn't say anything for a moment. You look like someone who isn't going to be talked out of anything, he said. Good, she said. That's accurate. The car arrived at 10:15. Different driver from Saturday. Older, with a quality of alertness that had nothing to do with caffeine. 2 other cars. Dante noticed her noticing. Standard, he said. Don't read into it. She read into it. The building they arrived at was in the financial district, Unremarkable from the outside, the kind of building that holds law firms and private equity concerns and other institutions whose most important work happens in conversations. Nobody writes down. 12th floor. Conference room with a long table and chairs that cost more than Nadine's monthly rent each, and a view of the city that was spectacular and also felt, somehow, like a threat. Look how high up we are. Look how far you could fall. There were 4 people in the room when they entered. Nadine had expected Garrett Price. She had formed a picture of him from what she knew, Vanessa's husband, the Heron Group, private consulting that operated in gray areas. She had pictured someone sleek and certain, the kind of man who wore his power like a good suit. The man at the head of the table was not that. Garrett Price was in his late 50s, heavy-set, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a cup of coffee in front of him, and the air of someone who had been doing this particular kind of thing for long enough that it no longer required performance. He looked, more than anything, like someone's unremarkable father at a parent-teacher conference who had something very specific he needed to address. Next to him, a woman in a charcoal suit whose introduction was Diana, representing associated interests, which was the kind of introduction that meant she was the most important person in the room and everyone knew it. She was perhaps 45, sharp-featured, with the quality of attention that made you feel your words were being transcribed in real time. 2 men flanking them, whose names were not offered, and who were clearly there to represent the fact that names were not being offered. Garrett Price looked at Nadine when she came in. Not with surprise. He'd been told she would be there, presumably, because nothing in his expression registered the unexpected. He looked at her the way you look at a variable that has chosen to be present for its own evaluation, weighing what that decision communicated. "Miss Brooks," he said. "Mr. Price," she said. She sat to Dante's right. The 2 unnamed men tracked the movement. Diana wrote something briefly on a legal pad, and then set her pen down. "Let's be efficient," Garrett Price said. He had a Baltimore accent underneath everything else, flattened by years of other places, but still there in the vowels. "Mr. Moretti, you have some awareness of why we're here." "Some," Dante said. "The short version, my clients have an interest in your current and ongoing divestment from certain enterprises. They'd like that divestment to be thorough and documented." "Your clients," Dante said. Who are your clients, Garrett?" Garrett Price looked at him steadily. "People who find your legitimate business holdings more useful than your illegitimate ones. People who would like to see the transition you've been making for the last 3 years reach its conclusion on an accelerated timeline. And if I don't find their timeline agreeable," Price glanced at Nadine just briefly, just long enough, "then certain materials currently in our possession become relevant to ongoing federal inquiries," he said. "Some of those materials concern your operations directly. Others," another brief glance at Nadine, "create questions about the nature of certain relationships that could prove inconvenient for people who would prefer to remain uninvolved." Nadine felt the muscle in Dante's forearm go rigid under the table. She knew it because her hand was an inch from his arm, and she could feel the change without touching it. She spoke before he could. "I'm going to stop you there," she said. Garrett Price looked at her with the mild interest of someone who has not expected to be interrupted and is deciding how to categorize the interruption. "You're using photographs of me as leverage," she said. "I want to understand clearly what those photographs are supposed to demonstrate." Price looked at Dante. Dante said nothing. Price looked back at Nadine. "Miss Brooks, I don't think you fully understand the nature of—" "I understand it fine," she said. "You have photographs of me entering and exiting a building. You have records, probably second-hand accounts, since I don't conduct conversations in places with recording devices, of conversations between myself and Mr. Moretti. You're suggesting that those photographs and those accounts can be characterized in a way that implicates me in something I have not been involved in order to create pressure on him." She paused. "What I'm asking is whether you actually believe that characterization, or whether you know it's false and are planning to use it anyway." The room was very quiet. Diana, who had not spoken yet, looked up from her legal pad. Garrett Price set down his coffee cup. "Miss Brooks?" "Because those are 2 different things," Nadine said. "If you believe it, you're wrong, and I can tell you why in specific terms. If you know it's false, then what you're describing is not leverage, it's a threat. And I've dealt with enough people in my life who thought they could threaten me into irrelevance that I'd like to know which one we're doing so I know how to respond." Garrett Price looked at her for a long moment. Then, very slowly, he smiled. Not warmly. The smile of someone recalibrating. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Nobody ever is," she said. "Answer the question." Diana spoke for the first time. Her voice was precise and without regional accent, the voice of someone who had trained themselves into neutrality. "Mr. Price's clients are not interested in Miss Brooks personally. The photographs were a precautionary measure." "A precautionary measure that was sent anonymously to hotel management to threaten my employment," Nadine said. A silence. Diana looked at Price. Price looked at the table. "That," Price said, "was an action taken independently by my wife. It was not sanctioned by my firm or its clients, and I was not aware of it until after it occurred." The air in the room changed. Dante turned his head very slightly, and Nadine caught the movement in her peripheral vision, the small tell of someone who has just received information that changes the configuration of everything. "Vanessa acted alone," Dante said. Not a question. "The photograph sent to the hotel was Vanessa's initiative," Price said. His voice had changed too. Lost a precise layer of its controlled quality, the layer you lose when personal and professional become the same problem. "She became aware of my firm's interest in this situation and drew her own conclusions about how to—" He stopped. "It was not authorized." "Your wife tried to get me fired," Nadine said, "using information from your investigation that you were conducting." She let the sentence sit. "And you're sitting here telling me that's a separate issue." "It's a complicating issue," Price said, and for the first time in the conversation he sounded like a man dealing with something he hadn't fully controlled, which was, Nadine suspected, a very unusual feeling for him. "Where is she now?" Dante asked. His voice had the flat quality that she had learned meant he was working very hard to stay inside the conversation rather than outside it. "At home," Price said. "She is not part of this meeting." "No?" Dante said. "She's just someone who used your professional apparatus for a personal grievance against a woman whose only involvement in any of this is knowing me." He looked at Price with the kind of stillness that didn't need volume. "And you let that happen." "I've already said—" "I know what you said." Dante leaned forward slightly, just slightly. "I want you to understand what I'm saying. Whatever arrangement we reach in this room today, and we will reach an arrangement because your client's interests and mine are not as far apart as this meeting is suggesting. It will include a comprehensive and final withdrawal of any attention, professional or personal, from Nadine Brooks. Every photograph, every account, every piece of material that references her in any form. Gone. Not filed, not held in reserve. Gone." Price looked at him. "That," Dante said, "is my first condition. Before we discuss timeline or documentation or anything else your clients would like to accelerate, that is the first thing that happens." Diana looked at Price. Price looked at Dante. Something passed between them that was the wordless negotiation of people who have done this long enough to have entire conversations in the movement of a glance. "Agreed," Diana said. Price said nothing, but he didn't contradict her, which was its own answer. Nadine breathed. She kept it quiet, kept it controlled, didn't let the relief be visible, because the room wasn't done, and visible relief in an unfinished negotiation was information you didn't give away. What followed was 2 hours of the most concentrated conversation Nadine had ever sat through. Not an argument, not a confrontation, but the meticulous and exhausting work of two sets of interests finding the shape they could both occupy. Dante's divestment, accelerated. Documentation provided to Price's clients' representatives rather than federal entities, which served everyone's interest in keeping the process private. A timeline of 18 months instead of the 3 years Dante had been operating on. 18 months to dismantle 19 years. She watched him agree to it, watched the specific quality of what that cost him, not in his face, which stayed composed, but in his hands, which she was close enough to see, and which he pressed flat on the table at one point as if feeling whether the surface was solid. She didn't reach for his hand. She wanted to. She didn't because this wasn't a moment for comfort. It was a moment for him to be seen choosing something, and comfort in the middle of a choice can look like the choice wasn't really his. At 12:40, Price gathered his papers. Diana closed her legal pad. The two unnamed men moved toward the door. Price looked at Nadine before he stood. "You're not what I built a file around," he said. It was as close to an apology as a man like Garrett Price was likely to produce. and she recognized it as such, and nodded once. He left. Diana paused at the door, looked at Dante. 18 months, she said. 18 months, he said. She left. The room was empty. 12th floor up, city spread out beyond the windows, morning moving toward afternoon with complete indifference to what had just happened in this conference room. Nadine sat for a moment. Then she said, "Are you okay?" Dante sat back in his chair. He put one hand over his eyes briefly, the gesture of a man allowing himself one private moment in the only private moment available. Then he dropped his hand. "I've been trying to do this for 3 years," he said. "I know. I thought I'd feel—" He stopped. "Different? Something cleaner," he said, "than this." She looked at him. "It doesn't feel clean because it's not finished. 18 months is a long time." "Yes. A lot can happen in 18 months. He looked at her then, and in his eyes was the question he wasn't asking, the one she could see clearly enough to read even without words. Whether she intended to be around for those 18 months. Whether what had happened in the last 6 days, which had taken them from strangers to something the English language didn't have a comfortable word for, was something she considered durable, or something she considered situational. She stood up, picked up her jacket from the back of the chair. "You should eat something," she said. "You didn't have breakfast." He blinked. "Come on," she said. She walked toward the door. After a moment, she heard the chair move behind her, heard him stand, heard him follow. She didn't look back, not because she doubted he was there, but because she'd learned something about trust over the last few days that had nothing to do with certainty. That trust was not the absence of risk, was not the guarantee of outcome, was not the knowledge that nothing would go wrong. Trust was the decision to walk forward anyway, toward a meal and a city and an afternoon that was still unresolved and uncertain and entirely, vertiginously real. She pushed the elevator button. The doors opened. They got in. And Nadine Brooks, who had spent 6 years being invisible in a marble lobby, who had spent a decade being careful and honest and quietly magnificent in ways that nobody had bothered to notice, stood in that elevator going down from the 12th floor of a financial district building with a man who was dismantling an empire partly because she had asked him to, and she felt not safe, not certain, not any of the clean words. She felt present. Fully, uncomplicatedly, stubbornly present in her own life in a way she hadn't felt in longer than she could accurately measure. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Outside, through the building's glass front, the city was doing what cities do, moving, loud, indifferent, magnificent. And somewhere across town, the Crown Meridian's afternoon shift was starting without her, and her cart was parked in the service corridor, and the marble floors were being cleaned by someone who was invisible to the people walking across them. She stepped out of the elevator, and then her phone rang. Unknown number, different unknown number than before. She looked at it for 1 second, too, feeling the specific quality of a call. You know before you answer is going to change the shape of the next several hours. She answered. The voice on the other end was a woman's, not composed, not controlled, fraying at every syllable. "This is Vanessa Price," the voice said, "and I need you to meet me, right now, alone." A sound that might have been a breath, or might have been something less composed than a breath. "I know what you're thinking, but I have something. Something about Dante Moretti that his people don't know I have. And if you don't come, I send it to every federal contact I have by end of business today." Nadine stood in the lobby of the 12th floor building with Dante 3 feet behind her, and she looked at the city through the glass, and she felt the ground under her feet make its decision about how solid it intended to be. The federal agents came on a Tuesday. Nadine found out the way she found out most things that happened in Dante's world, not from Dante directly, but from the shape of what was missing. He didn't call at 7 a.m. the way he had every morning for the past 3 weeks. He didn't answer when she called back at 7:15. His assistant, the smooth-voiced man she'd come to know as Vincent, picked up on the second ring and told her in the careful, uninflected tone of someone reading from a script they'd prepared in advance that Mr. Moretti was unavailable and that she should go to work and behave as she normally would, and that everything was being handled. She hung up and sat on the edge of her bed for 4 minutes. Then she got dressed and went to work. The Crown Meridian lobby was the same as it always was at 7:30 a.m. The low lights, the overnight crew finishing their sweep, the distant percussion of the breakfast service setting up. Marcus was at the housekeeping station. He looked at her when she came in, and she looked back at him, and something passed between them that didn't need language. The acknowledgement that the thing they had both been waiting for with different degrees of dread had apparently arrived. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm at work," she said, which was not an answer but was the only one she had. She restocked the linen cart. She checked the supply inventory for rooms 7 through 12 on the 6th floor. She signed off on a maintenance request for the broken towel rack in 614 that had been on the request list for 11 days. She did the work. She did all of it with the narrow functional focus she'd learned at 23, and she did not think about anything beyond the immediate task in front of her, because thinking beyond the immediate task would have produced an anxiety with physical weight, and she needed to be able to move. At 9:40, her personal phone buzzed. Not Vincent. A number she didn't recognize. She stepped into the service corridor and answered. "Miss Brooks?" A woman's voice. Professional, measured, with the particular cadence of someone who had been trained to sound neutral in situations that weren't. "My name is Agent Patricia Reyes. I'm with the Federal Task Force currently conducting an investigation into several businesses associated with Dante Moretti. We'd like to speak with you at your earliest convenience." Nadine leaned against the corridor wall. The fluorescent light above her hummed its single, indifferent note. "Am I required to speak with you?" she asked. A brief pause. "You're not under any legal obligation at this time. We're asking voluntarily." "Then I'd like to speak with a lawyer first." Another pause, this one with a slightly different texture. Not surprised exactly, more like recalibrated. "Of course. That's your right. We'll be in touch to schedule." A beat. "Miss Brooks, I want you to know that our interest in you is limited. We understand you're a peripheral figure in a larger situation. Cooperating voluntarily tends to clarify that status quickly." "I heard you," Nadine said. "I'd still like a lawyer." She hung up. She stood in the corridor for a moment with the phone in her hand and thought about the word peripheral. How clinical it was. How easily the machinery of something enormous could reduce a person to a modifier in a sentence about someone else's story. Peripheral. Adjacent. Associated. She thought about what Dante had told her 3 weeks ago in that 8th floor room while the city made its Saturday noise outside the window. All of it. The 19 years. The decisions that compounded until they were architecture, until the structure was too large and too load-bearing to simply walk away from without engineering the exit. She had sat across from him, and she had listened, and she had asked questions. Hard, specific questions. Not the kind designed to get through an uncomfortable conversation, but the kind that wanted actual answers. And he had given her the actual answers, which had cost him something she could see in his face each time he delivered one. She had not absolved him. She had not been asked to. But she had understood by the end of that conversation that the man she was looking at was not the same as the empire he'd built, and that those two things, a person and what they had done, were not always the same country even when they shared a name. She had also understood that understanding this did not make her safe. It just made her honest about what she was choosing. She called Marcus's extension. "I need 2 hours," she said when he answered. "Personal emergency. I'll make up the time this week." Marcus said, "Go." Just that. She went. The lawyer's name was Diana Cho, and Nadine found her through the legal aid network she'd looked up 3 weeks ago when she'd first understood that looking one up was probably not a matter of if, but when. Diana was 41, worked out of an office on the 14th floor of a building that was almost but not quite downtown, and had the kind of face that communicated competence before she said a word. Not warm, not cold, just clear. The face of someone who assessed situations rather than felt them for a living. Nadine sat across from her and told her everything in 31 minutes, starting with the lobby and the towels, and ending with the phone call this morning, and Diana listened with a yellow legal pad in front of her, and a pen that she clicked 3 times and then set down and did not pick up again. When Nadine finished, Diana said, "You haven't done anything." "I know that. I mean legally, factually. You have had personal conversations with a man who is under federal investigation. You accepted a car ride. You met with him privately. None of that constitutes participation in criminal activity." She paused. "Did he ever discuss specific operations with you? Names, money movements, planned activities?" "He told me the general history," Nadine said carefully. "Not specifics, not names, not numbers." "Did he ever ask you to do anything for him? Carry something, deliver something, communicate something to someone?" "No." Diana nodded. "Then you're what they said you are. Peripheral. The reason they want to talk to you isn't because they think you did something. It's because they think you might know something, or they want to see if proximity to you creates pressure on him." "They want to use me," Nadine said. "They want to evaluate whether you're usable." Diana picked up the pen again, clicked it once. "The answer is no, because you don't have anything they need. You go in, you answer the questions that are answerable, you decline the ones that aren't, you walk out. It's not pleasant, but it's finite." She paused. "The more interesting question is what happens to Moretti." Nadine looked at her. "If this goes where investigations like this typically go," Diana said, "he's looking at a very long process. Best case, his legal team negotiates something that addresses the legitimate exposure while keeping him out of serious confinement. Worst case, she left it there. The separation he's been attempting from his criminal activities, how far along is it actually?" "He told me 3 years," Nadine said. "He said it was going slowly." Diana made a note. "That may matter. Courts look at trajectory, whether a person was moving towards something different when they were caught versus whether they were caught in the middle of more of the same." She set the pen down again. "Can I ask you something that's not strictly legal?" "Yes." "What is this man to you, practically speaking? Where are you in whatever this is?" Nadine sat with the question for a moment. "I don't know the name for it yet," she said honestly. "I know that I see him clearly. I'm not making him into something he isn't. I know what he's done, and I know who he's trying to be now, and I know those things don't cancel each other out." She paused. "And I know that none of that is simple." Diana looked at her steadily. "No," she said. "It's not." She capped her pen. "I'll make some calls this afternoon. Do not speak to Agent Reyes or anyone else without me present. I'll be in touch by end of day." Nadine thanked her and left. She was on the elevator going down when her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from the number she'd saved as D, which she had not heard from all morning and had been not thinking about with considerable effort. It said, "I'm sorry." And then, after a line break, "This is not the cost I meant for you to pay." She stood in the elevator of Diana Cho's building, holding her phone, and read it twice. Then she typed back, "I know," and hit send. She went back to work. She finished the afternoon shift. She covered 7:06 through 7:12, replaced a broken ice bucket, navigated a complaint from the guest in 7:09 about the noise from the street. That was genuine city noise and not something any hotel could actually address. And she did all of it without the quality of going through motions. She was present. She was functional. She was the Nadine who had showed up to this job for 6 years because the job needed doing, and doing it well was its own kind of integrity. At 3:15, Marcus found her in the linen room. "The footage," he said, without preamble. "From the lobby, the day with the towels." She looked at him. "Rhea told me the hotel's legal team has been subpoenaed for it." His voice was even, but his eyes were doing something they did when he was working to keep himself on the professional side of a reaction. "The federal investigation. They want the security footage from that afternoon." "That's the lobby," Nadine said. "That's public space." "I know." He paused. "I just wanted you to know before you heard it from someone else." She nodded. "Thank you, Marcus." He started to leave, stopped, turned back. For what it's worth. And you can tell me to mind my business. I won't take offense. For what it's worth, watching what happened to you that afternoon, and watching what happened after, he paused, choosing. You handled yourself with more dignity than most people would. Any version of it. He held her gaze for a moment. I just wanted you to hear that. He left before she could figure out what to say back. She stood in the linen room for a moment, surrounded by the clean, folded smell of freshly laundered towels, and felt something she wasn't expecting. Something that wasn't about Dante or federal agents or Vanessa Price or any of the enormous things that were currently arranging themselves around her life. She felt simply seen. By Marcus, who had been bringing her coffee for 6 years without making it an announcement, who had sat across from her in the break room and told her to be careful, and meant it because he was her friend, even though neither of them had ever used that word directly. She put a hand on the linen shelf and breathed. Then she went back to work. The interview with federal agents happened 8 days later, in a conference room in a building that smelled like carpet cleaner and institutional coffee, with Diana Cho beside her, and 2 agents across the table. Agent Reyes was one of them. Mid-40s, competent, the neutral professional voice on the phone made flesh. The other was younger, male, with the slightly overworked quality of someone carrying more case files than ours. They asked about the lobby incident. They asked about the conversations in the lounge. They asked about the car. They asked about the 8th floor meeting, which told her they had more information about her movements than she'd realized, which was unpleasant and also not surprising. Diana declined several questions. Nadine answered the ones she could. She told them about the lobby because it was on the hotel's footage, and there was nothing in it that wasn't already visible. She told them she had met with Dante Moretti on several occasions in a personal capacity. She told them he had never asked her to do anything, carry anything, or communicate anything relating to his business. She told them the truth, which was that she had chosen to spend time with someone whose situation she understood to be complicated, and that choosing to spend time with someone was not the same as participating in their activities. The younger agent said, Miss Brooks, are you aware of the nature of Mr. Moretti's criminal organization? I'm aware that he is under federal investigation, she said carefully. I am not in a position to characterize the nature of his activities beyond what's been alleged publicly. Diana touched her arm lightly. Stop there. She stopped there. They were in the room for 2 hours and 40 minutes. When it was over, Diana walked her out to the street and stood with her on the sidewalk for a moment. You did well, Diana said. Will it be enough? For you? Yes. She paused. For him, that's a different file. She looked at Nadine with the clear, assessing eyes that had characterized everything from the first meeting. Whatever you decide to do going forward, with him, with any of this, decide it from what you actually want, not from obligation or fear. You don't owe this situation any particular outcome. Nadine nodded. Diana went back inside. Nadine stood on the sidewalk. She had been standing on a lot of sidewalks lately, she thought, making decisions in the open air with the city going on around her. Maybe that was the right way to make them. No lobbies, no conference rooms, no rooms with low lights and careful furniture. Just the street and the ordinary noise and yourself with the decision. She called Vincent. He answered on the first ring. I'd like to see him, she said. A pause. He's not... I know where he is, Vincent. She had worked it out from enough context by now. Tell him I'd like to see him, today if that's possible. A longer pause. I'll call you back. He called back in 20 minutes. He gave her an address. Not the 8th floor building, somewhere else, closer to the water, which she supposed made sense for reasons she didn't want to examine too closely in terms of what it implied about the current state of things. She got there at 5:30. It was a smaller space than the converted warehouse, an apartment or something close to it, functional rather than designed, the kind of place you used rather than inhabited. Dante answered the door himself, which was the first thing she noticed. No Vincent hovering, no bodyguard shape in the peripheral. He looked different, not destroyed. She had braced herself for destroyed, And what she found instead was something more like reduced. The quality of a person who has had certain things stripped away and is still standing but is no longer presenting the version that those things had maintained. He was in a plain white shirt. His face had the specific exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept well in more than a week. He stepped back to let her in. She went in. The room had 2 chairs and a table with a lamp and a window that showed the water in the early evening light, going gray and silver. She sat in one of the chairs. He sat in the other. There was no coffee this time. "How was it?" he asked, meaning the interview. "Manageable," she said. "Diana is good." He nodded. "She is. I'm glad you found her." "I found her before you could suggest her," Nadine said. "I want you to know that." Something moved in his expression. "I know," he said. "I saw the billing sequence." At her look, he added, "I wasn't checking up on you. I was making sure the cost was—" "Dante." He stopped. "Don't manage me," she said. "Not now. Not here. We're past that." He sat back, let his hands rest open on his knees, which was the most undefended posture she'd seen from him, the posture of someone who had run out of the energy required to maintain positions. "You're right. Tell me where you are," she said. "Legally, actually." He looked at the window for a moment. "There are conversations happening between my lawyers and the task force. They're preliminary. The shape of what they want versus the shape of what I'm able to provide." He paused. "There's a version of this where I cooperate on specific aspects of my activities that are of interest to them in exchange for a framework that allows me to—" He stopped again. "Addresses things." "You're going to cooperate," she said, "with conditions." "What kind of conditions?" "The kind that protect people who didn't choose to be part of this." He held her gaze steadily. "People adjacent to me. People whose only connection is personal." She understood what he meant. She didn't look away. "And the criminal side," she said, "the organization itself." "Is over," he said. "It was over before last Tuesday. The investigation accelerated a timeline that was already in motion." He said it with the flatness of someone who has grieved something before they lost it, who has been doing the anticipatory work for long enough that the actual arrival of loss has a different quality than you'd expect. Not relief exactly, but the particular kind of quiet that comes when a thing you've been dreading finally arrives and turns out to be survivable. 19 years. And then it's a conversation in a conference room. "Does that feel like anything?" she asked. Not clinically, just honestly, because she wanted to know, because she had spent 3 weeks trying to understand this man. And this was the largest thing in his life. And she wanted to know what it felt like from inside it. He thought about it genuinely, which was the thing she'd come to appreciate about him most. That he didn't answer quickly, didn't reach for the available emotion when the actual one was slower and less convenient. "It feels like putting down something very heavy," he said, "that you've been carrying so long you'd forgotten you were carrying it, and your arms hurt, but—" A pause. "They're free." She nodded. They sat in the quiet of the room for a moment. The water outside went on doing what water does. "I need to ask you something," Nadine said. "Yes." "What do you want after this? When the framework is sorted and the lawyers have finished and whatever happens has happened. What do you want?" He looked at her with those still eyes that she had spent weeks reading and was only now beginning to understand were still not because nothing moved beneath them, but because so much moved beneath them that stillness was what the surface looked like when everything underneath was in motion. "I want a life that doesn't require someone standing at the door," he said. "I want to be in a room without calculating it first." A pause. "I want—" He stopped, looked at his hands, back at her. "I want to keep having conversations that actually mean something, with someone who tells me the truth and expects it back." She held his gaze. "That's not nothing," she said. "No," he said. "It's the only thing I've wanted in a very long time that didn't cost someone else something to provide." She sat with that. Let it be what it was. "I'm not going anywhere," she said finally. But I need you to understand what that means and doesn't mean. It doesn't mean I'm standing beside the Dante Moretti that the federal government is building a case about. It means I'm staying in contact with the person I've been talking to for the past several weeks, who I think is trying to become something different, and I'm willing to watch that happen. She paused. But if it stops happening, if this framework collapses into something that looks like what came before, I'm gone. Not as a threat, just as a fact. He said, I know. And I'm not going to be kept, she said. Not driven places for my safety, not resources managed on my behalf, not decisions made about my life from adjacent rooms. I take care of myself. I have taken care of myself since I was 23 years old, and I'm not stopping. I know that too, he said, and the corner of his mouth moved in something that was almost finally a real smile. You told me the first day, in the lounge, you never asked to be rescued. I didn't. I heard you. The almost smile settled. It was the first thing about you that I didn't know how to fit into any category I already had. She said, Good. Outside, the water went silver and then darker, and the lights of the city came on one district at a time in the way they always did at that hour. The slow illumination of 10,000 separate evenings happening simultaneously, each one its own complete and unrelated world. Nadine stayed for another hour. They talked, not about lawyers or federal frameworks or criminal organizations, but about smaller things, the things they hadn't gotten to yet in all the weeks of larger things. His mother, who was in Milan and did not know the whole truth, and probably never would. Her sister in Atlanta, who called every Sunday and always started the call with, Are you eating enough? Regardless of what else was happening. The documentary about migratory birds that Nadine had been watching the night all of this started, which led to a conversation about migration in general that neither of them had expected to find interesting, but both of them did. At 6:45, she stood up and put on her jacket. Dante walked her to the door. He didn't try to call a car. He didn't try to come with her. He stood at the door of the apartment with his hands at his sides. I'll call you, she said. Okay, he said. She left. She took the subway home, the ordinary subway, with its ordinary smells and its fluorescent lights, and the man across from her doing a crossword on paper with an actual pen, and the teenager with headphones whose music was loud enough that Nadine could make out the rhythm 3 feet away, and the woman in scrubs who was asleep against the window with the complete trust of someone whose exhaustion had overridden all other considerations. Nadine sat in the middle of all of it and felt, in the most uncomplicated way she'd felt anything in weeks, present. Just present. On the subway, in her body, in her life. She got off at her stop, walked the 4 blocks to her building, took the stairs because the elevator was being unpredictable again, and she'd reported it twice, and was waiting with the weary patience of a person who had learned that some things just take the time they take. She unlocked her apartment. It was the same as she'd left it this morning. Coffee cup in the sink, the throw from the couch on the floor because she'd slept there last night and never got around to refolding it, the little stack of library books on the corner table, the container of her mother's extra cookies that her mother had pressed on her last Sunday, wrapped in foil, sitting on the counter. She picked up the cookie container and held it for a moment. Just the weight of it, and the foil, and the particular feeling of something made by someone who loved you sitting in your hands. She put it back. Made tea. Stood at her kitchen window looking out at the narrow view she had. The back of the building across the alley. A fire escape with a potted plant someone had optimistically placed there. A slice of dark sky with 2 stars and a plane blinking its patient way across it. Normal. All of it normal. And she was inside it, still herself, still Nadine Brooks from East Baltimore, who cleaned hotel lobbies and returned wallets and covered extra shifts and made pasta when she was sad, and called her mother on Sundays and had, in the past several weeks, walked through something enormous and come out the other side with her integrity intact and her eyes open. Not unchanged. She wasn't naive enough to pretend unchanged. There were things she knew now that she hadn't known before, about power and consequence and the specific way the world operated in the registers most people were never asked to see directly. There were things she would carry, not as burdens exactly, but as the weight that comes from genuine experience, from having been tested in ways that are not optional and having found out, in the testing, what she was made of. She was made of something solid. She had always suspected it. Now she knew. 4 months later, Ria called her into the office and told her about the employee development program, the opening in guest and staff relations, the glowing assessments from coworkers across 5 departments, the observation, which Ria delivered with the directness that had always been her best quality, that Nadine had been functioning as an unofficial advocate for junior and service staff for years, without title or compensation, and that the hotel had belatedly understood this was something they should formalize rather than continue to take for granted. Nadine sat across from Ria in the small office with the window that looked out on the east corridor, and she thought about 6 years of marble floors and linen carts and guests who looked through her like glass. And she thought about the moment in the lobby with the towels and the polished black shoe and the name that changed the temperature of a room. And she thought about the east sitting room and Camille's hands pressed flat against her knees, and the fluorescent corridor and Marcus's coffee, and the conference room that smelled like institutional carpet, and Diana Cho's clear, assessing eyes. She thought about the subway, and the man with the crossword, and the woman sleeping against the window. She thought about her mother's cookies in foil. "Yes," she said. "I'll take it." Ria nodded in the way of someone whose recommendation had just been confirmed. Good. Nadine started the program the following month. It was harder than the work she already knew because it asked different things of her. Organizational navigation, the management of people who were sometimes resistant, the challenge of changing institutional habits that had been calcified for years. The service staff and the guests were supposed to exist in the same building in the same moment. But the hotel had spent decades maintaining a careful social distance between those two facts. And Nadine's job, stated plainly, was to close that distance without destroying the functioning of either side. She was good at it. Not immediately, not perfectly, but with the particular competence of someone who had learned their field from the inside and understood it in a way that no training manual could provide. She made mistakes. She made them specifically, and she acknowledged them specifically, and she corrected them and moved forward. She didn't make them the same way twice. Vanessa Price rebuilt her professional life in Chicago, away from the connections she'd burned, carrying a version of herself that was slightly less certain of her own immunity to consequence. Dominique Hall redirected her talent toward a smaller firm, where the culture was different and her genuine abilities had more room to operate without the performance that had always cost her more than she admitted. Camille sent Nadine a card 7 months later, a simple card, nothing dramatic, that said she hoped things were going well and that she was sorry for who she'd been in that lobby. Nadine read it twice, set it on the counter next to her mother's cookie container, and left it there. Dante's legal situation resolved in the way that legal situations involving federal investigations resolve when good lawyers operate with real cooperation and genuine documented trajectory toward legitimate operation, slowly, expensively, imperfectly, but finally. He was not imprisoned. He paid a price that was significant and specific and did not make him whole, but made a kind of accounting possible. The legitimate businesses remained. The rest of it ended. He called her when it was over. She answered. "It's done," he said. "How do you feel?" she asked. A pause. "Like someone who got out of a building before it fell," he said. "Not graceful, but out." "That's enough," she said. "Is it?" She thought about it honestly. "For now," she said. "Ask me again in 6 months." He asked her again in 6 months. She had a different answer by then, and it was better than the one before. And 6 months after that, it was better still, not because life had become uncomplicated or because either of them had been transformed into easier versions of themselves, but because they had kept choosing to show up for the thing between them, to be honest when being honest was inconvenient, to disagree when they disagreed, to not paper over the places where the difference in what they'd lived showed its edges. It was not a fairy tale. Fairy tales require someone to be rescued. Nobody in this story got rescued. They got through. They made choices and paid prices and got through, and on the other side of getting through, they found something that was quieter than happiness and more durable. The specific feeling of a life you have actually chosen, with your eyes open, knowing what it costs. The lobby of the Crown Meridian Hotel was the same as it had always been. The marble floors, the gilt elevator doors, the ambient performance of wealth meeting hospitality in carefully calibrated light. Nadine walked through it every morning now with the badge of her new title, and the marble still needed polishing, and the towels still needed restocking, and the guests still looked through the staff the way they always had, and her job, now, was to change the part of that she could change, systematically, one policy and one person and one conversation at a time. She was not finished. She was not going to be finished for a long time. But she walked through that lobby, the lobby where they had laughed at her, where a shoe had come down on a stack of clean towels with the casual cruelty of someone who had decided what she was. And she walked through it the way you walk through a place that no longer has the power to diminish you. Not with triumph, not with the performed confidence of someone making a point, just with the ordinary, unremarkable dignity of a person who knows who she is and doesn't need the room to confirm it. The marble was the same beneath her feet. She was not.